You've just opened your eyes to 0.5 million years ago. There are no songs, no music, no stories yet. Only wind blowing through grass, only quiet sounds of feet on dirt and leaves moving in trees. But something is about to change, a sound no one has ever made before, not to talk, not to warn, but just to feel. One boy is about to play the first musical instrument, and it's not just noise. It's the start of rhythm, feeling, and meaning, if you want to see how life really was, before words and music and fire. Then subscribe now, because this is where music was born. And it all began with one breath through a bone. He was always the last to return, not because he was slow, but because his eyes followed things that didn't matter. To others, a broken shell was nothing, just dead weight underfoot. But to him, it was strange, and strange things pulled him. Like hunger, he walked beyond the lines the others followed, beyond the tree with the split trunk, beyond the dry stream bed where elders said not to go. He liked the places where the wind had no name, where bones stuck out of the dirt like teeth, where birds didn't sing but the world still made noise. He didn't know the word for music. None of them did, but his ears caught rhythms no one else cared about: the crack of tree bark, the way a branch slapped another when wind passed through, the thump of his heel against different rocks, soft ones, sharp ones, ones that echoed like caves. One day, when the air was thin and still, he heard something that made him freeze. A sound not made by beast or man. It came from the wind itself, slipping through a broken leg bone left on the ground. He crouched near it. Heart slow and ears sharp, the sound came again, just a short wheeze. He picked up the bone, turned it in his hand, felt the way it narrowed, hollow and light. He brought it close to his mouth and blew, not because he knew what would happen, but because something inside told him to try. The sound it made was soft, cracked, like air breaking, but it moved through him like cold water. He blinked, blew, again and again, and the note deepened, changed shape. It wasn't like a cry or a scream or a howl. It was something else, something between silence and breath, and in that moment, he had found something no one had ever meant to find. The valley was quiet except for him and the bone. The others were far off, skinning bark, cracking nuts, checking old traps. He stayed, playing the hollow bone again and again, changing the way he held it, tilting it, cupping his hand near the end. Each time the sound came back different, as if the bone was learning with him. He laughed quietly, like a secret escaping. Then he stood and walked home, carrying the bone like it was alive. No one asked what he held. They had other worries: food, fire, sleep, cold. He didn't speak of it, not yet. At night he waited for the others to sleep. Then he pulled the bone from under the grass and blew soft, slow breaths into it. It didn't always work, but when it did, it made him feel awake in a new way, like his body had more than hands and feet. It had something else inside, something that moved with sound. One evening, a child saw him. She stared, tilted her head, and ran off laughing. Soon others came, older ones, curious and cautious. They asked what he was doing, what the noise meant, if it was a game or a warning. He said nothing, just showed them the bone and blew a clear short note. The sound hung in the air like fog, then faded. The listeners stepped back, unsure if it was safe. The elders frowned, called it strange, called it dangerous. One said it would wake things that should sleep. Another said it sounded like death walking in the trees. They told him to stop, said no good came from sound with no reason. But the boy couldn't stop, not because he was stubborn, but because the sound had changed something in him. Even when he tried to forget it, his hands remembered the weight of the bone, his lips remembered where to blow, and his breath moved with the shape of the valley's wind. He became something new. He didn't hunt well, didn't fight well, didn't speak much, but he had the sound. The children followed him now, asking him to blow the bone again. He showed them how, and they failed and laughed and tried again. Mothers asked him to play when babies cried, and sometimes the sound calmed them, other times it didn't. Still, they asked again. He played when the hunters stretched their arms before the kill. He played slow when they were still, fast when they began to move. He didn't know the word for rhythm, but he knew how their feet matched the beat. One elder asked him to play after her sister died. He didn't know what to do, so he blew one long, steady breath through the bone. The sound echoed against the stones and stayed in the ears of those who stood nearby. They wept, not for the sound, but for the stillness it followed. It was the first time his noise became more than just noise. It became something they carried afterward, like a scar or a story. He didn't become a leader. He didn't tell others what to do, but they began to look for him before journeys, before sleep, before bad weather. They wanted his sound, not for commands, not for magic, but for feeling. It made their breathing deeper, their minds quieter, their fear less sharp. He had no name, not one that stayed. But now they whispered things like Wind Boy, Bone Singer, Breath Holder. The names didn't matter to him. He only wanted to hear what would come next from inside the hollow bone, and so he kept walking, always to places where the wind moved strangely, looking for new shapes, new holes, new sounds waiting inside the bones of birds and beasts. And with each new sound, he wasn't just making noise anymore. He was weaving the first thread of something humans had never known: music. Not songs with words, not patterns with drums, not dances with rules, just the feeling of sound that made people stop, listen and feel without needing to speak. And though he didn't know it, he had stepped into a role no one else had ever carried. Not a hunter, not a fighter, not a maker of tools, but the first to shape emotion out of air, the first to give voice to breath, the first to play an instrument and listen to what it gave back. Now they waited for his sound, not because it was new, but because it had become part of them. Like fire, like sleep, like hunger, they didn't understand what it was, but they knew they felt different when it came. Calmer when he played slow, sharper when he played fast. Children slept easier, elders spoke softer. Some began to ask for it before a hunt, others before a birth. A few asked him to play when someone didn't return, and he did. Each time the bone lifted to his lips, something inside him tightened. The sound had stopped being his alone. He didn't mind, not at first. He still loved the way breath moved through bone. He still wandered alone to find better ones, thinner, cleaner, some with 2 holes. He began carving edges, smoothing them with river stones. He made them longer, curved, bent like roots. He tested different bones, bird legs, hollow antlers, sometimes cracked reeds. Each new sound was a step further from silence, but with each step, the distance between him and the others grew. Now people stopped him when he passed. Play something for the children, they said. Play something before we eat, they said. Play something before she gives birth. Before we burn the body, before we move camp, before we sleep. And when he didn't want to play, they waited anyway. And that silence became heavy. A silence that accused him of keeping something back. He became afraid of silence. Not the natural kind, but the one made by too many eyes staring. He would wake at night with the bone still in his hand, too tired to play, too needed not to. No one said thank you, not out of unkindness, but because they forgot he was still a boy, still someone with hands that hurt and breath that faltered. One morning, his bone cracked. He had pressed too hard, too long. The sound came out wrong, a shriek instead of a hum. Children laughed, an elder frowned. Someone whispered bad sign. He walked away without speaking, not angry, just hollow. Like the bone he had broken, he returned to the ridge where he had first heard wind sing, sat under the same stone outcrop, fingers in dirt. There were no bones left there, only silence and wind. He stayed until dusk, then found a new place, a wet cave where birds had once nested. He gathered bones, soaked them, carved them, shaped them, and there he made something new. Not just a sound, but something that changed with each hole he added. Now he could control pitch, rhythm, feel. He didn't have words for those things, but his fingers learned them before his mind did. When he returned to the camp, he played something no one had heard before. It was not just sound. It was shape, feeling, motion, memory. People stopped moving, stopped chewing, stopped talking. They listened like trees listen to rain, and when he finished, someone cried without knowing why, not for the sound, but for the way it reached something deep inside, older than thought, older than story. From that day, he no longer played only for moments, he played for the whole group. His sound opened their mornings and closed their nights. It signaled safe paths, warned of storms, told of danger and of peace, and soon his music became a signal, not just an emotion, one tone for fire, one for return, one for loss, one for joy. No one taught him these, they just happened as shared. Language made without words, but the more he gave, the more alone he felt. No one else could play like him. No one knew how the bone should feel in the hand. No one heard the difference between breath to sharp and breath just right. He watched others laugh and work, but he only watched. His place was at the edge, always listening, always ready. He had become the tribe's breath, but forgotten his own. Then, one night, as he sat outside the shelter watching stars, he heard a sound, soft, broken, unsure. He turned his head and saw a younger boy, maybe 7 winters old, holding a jagged little bone, blowing into it with puffy cheeks. The sound was wrong, off-key, wobbly, but it was music, not good, not clear, but born from want, not from order. The older boy didn't speak, just smiled. A real smile, the first in many days, not because someone had copied him, but because the weight had shifted. Music was no longer only his to carry, now it was spreading. The tribe would forget his name. They might forget his face, but not the feeling his sound left behind. Not the breath that once filled hollow bone and made people feel human. Not the first time silence turned into memory. Not the first time someone chose to listen instead of speak. He had begun alone, but he would not end that way, and somewhere in the trees, wind moved again, whistling through old bones no one had touched, waiting for new hands, new breath, new music.